Picture this. The air is thick with the cloying scent of incense and damp earth, a smell you associate with funerals. But the body is not in a casket. The body is you. You are kneeling, the rough wool of your tunic scratching at your knees, a heavy black cloth draped over your head, plunging the world into a suffocating darkness. You hear the priest's voice, a familiar baritone now laced with a chilling finality, chanting the Mass for the dead. For you, he declares you dead to the world, a corpse walking among the living. The congregation, your family, your friends, the girl you thought you might one day marry, they are all there, their faces a blur of pity and terror just beyond the veil of cloth. You are a ghost at your own burial. The ritual ends. The cloth is lifted, but the darkness remains in your soul. They hand you the instruments of your new life, a leper's clapper, a small wooden noisemaker to announce your unclean presence, and a long gray robe, the uniform of the damned. You are led to the town gate, the heavy wood groaning open like the jaws of some great beast. You are given one last look at the world you knew, a world that has already forgotten you. Then the gate slams shut, the sound of the bolt sliding home a thunderclap that seals your fate. You are outside. You are alone. You are a leper. And now, please stop the video and subscribe to our channel. To be able to keep making videos like this, we need to reach 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. Thank you. Before the gray robe, there was a world of vibrant color. Before the clapper, a world of birdsong and laughter. Alaric, son of Thomas the carpenter, knew this world intimately in the year of our Lord 1222. His was a life carved from the simple, sturdy oak of rural existence. His earliest memories were of the scent of fresh sawdust, a clean, sharp perfume that clung to his father's clothes and filled their small, sturdy home. He remembered the rhythmic rasp of the saw and the percussive tap of the mallet, the sounds that were the bedrock of his childhood. His hands, not yet marked by fate, were learning the trade, feeling the grain of the wood, learning its secrets, its strengths, and its weaknesses. He was a boy full of unthinking grace, with a shock of straw-colored hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. Life was a series of simple, profound textures, the rough bark of the trees in the small wood behind the village, the coarse weave of his woolen tunic, the surprising warmth of a fresh loaf of bread clutched in his hands, given to him by his mother, her smile a beacon in his small universe. He was not a creature of great ambition. His dreams were as solid and unadorned as the furniture his father built. He dreamed of one day taking over the workshop, of having sons of his own to teach the craft, of marrying Elara, the weaver's daughter. Her hair was the color of dark honey, and her laughter, a rare and precious sound, was like the chiming of the small bell in the chapel on a clear morning. During the St. John's Eve festival, when the great bonfire sent sparks dancing into the velvet night sky, he had held her hand, a fleeting, electric touch that promised a future as bright and warm as the flames before them. In that moment, the world was perfect and eternal, a well-made chest, solid and secure. He could not have known that the wood of his life was already riddled with a worm, a silent, insidious decay that was beginning its slow, inexorable work. The world was a conspiracy of hope, and he was its most helpless victim, a lamb being fattened in a sun-drenched pasture, oblivious to the shadow of the slaughterhouse that was already beginning to fall across the land. The foundations of his reality were about to be pulverized, his future not just stolen but systematically unwritten, his very humanity set to be ritually dismantled piece by horrifying piece. The first betrayal was silent and subtle, a traitorous whisper from his own body. It began on his left forearm, a small, pale patch of skin, no bigger than a penny. He noticed it one afternoon while washing at the basin, the water cool against his skin. But on that patch, the coolness was gone. There was no sensation at all. He rubbed it, pinched it, even pricked it with a splinter from the workshop floor. Nothing. A strange, hollow dread, cold and heavy as a river stone, settled in his stomach. He told no one. What was there to tell? It was a curiosity, a flaw in the tapestry of his flesh, nothing more. He wrapped a strip of cloth around his arm, a secret shame hidden from the world. But the disease, this patient, insidious hunter, was not content with one small victory. Weeks later, Another patch appeared on his thigh, then another on his cheek, a ghostly map of his body's surrender. The discoloration began, a faint mottling, like old parchment left in the rain. He would spend hours staring at his reflection in a bucket of water, his face a grotesque parody of the one he knew. The fear was a living thing now, a rat gnawing at his insides. He sought remedies in secret, whispering his symptoms to a traveling hedge witch who sold him a foul-smelling poultice of herbs and dung, which did nothing but stain his skin and deepen his despair. He prayed with a frantic intensity, his whispered pleas lost in the vaulted darkness of the empty church at night. Then came the first nodule. It blossomed below his right eye, a hard, painless lump that distorted his features, pulling the skin taut. It was the first visible sign, the first undeniable mark of the beast. He could no longer hide it. His mother was the first to see it, her hand flying to her mouth, a small, choked gasp escaping her lips. The love in her eyes was suddenly poisoned by a new, terrifying emotion, fear. His father, a man of few words, simply stared, his face going white as bone, the tools in his hands suddenly still. The unspoken word hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Leprosy. It was a word from sermons, a word of biblical horror, a thing of myth and nightmare. It was not a thing that happened here, in their village, to their son. The conspiracy of silence was broken, replaced by a conspiracy of terror. Alaric was no longer just a boy with a strange affliction. He was becoming a symbol, a vessel for the deepest fears of his community. The disease was not just consuming his flesh, it was consuming his identity, a slow, horrifying erasure of the boy he had been. The arrival of Father Michael at their door was as inevitable as the setting of the sun. He was a man Alaric had known for all his 17 years, a man whose hands had blessed him, whose voice had guided him in catechism. Now, he stood on their threshold not as a pastor but as an inquisitor, his face a mask of grim duty. He was the first of the complicit system enforcers, a cog in the vast, unfeeling machinery of religious law. The examination was a ritual of humiliation. Alaric was made to stand in the center of the room, stripped to the waist, while the priest, holding a small wooden cross before him as if to ward off a demon, inspected his body. The priest's touch was cold and impersonal, his fingers prodding the numb patches of skin, his eyes scanning the grotesque nodules with the cold calculation of a merchant assessing damaged goods. He did not ask of Alaric's pain or his fear. He was merely verifying the signs, ticking off the boxes of a divine and terrible checklist. The questions he asked were not for diagnosis but for condemnation. Had he consorted with sinners? Had he entertained impure thoughts? The implication was clear. This was not a sickness of the body but a sickness of the soul, a physical manifestation of a spiritual rot. Alaric's parents stood by, helpless, their faces etched with a grief so profound it seemed to have aged them a decade in a single hour. They were watching their son be legally and spiritually reclassified from human to monster. The verdict, when it came, was delivered without emotion, a simple statement of fact that carried the weight of 1,000 papal bulls. "It is the facies leprosa," the priest declared, the Latin term lending a veneer of learned authority to the brutal sentence. The lion face, the mark of the unclean. The system, ancient and implacable, now took over. Father Michael explained the process, his voice devoid of compassion, reciting the rules as if reading a deed of property. Alaric would have to be presented to the community. He would have to undergo the leper's mass, the rite of separation. He would be cast out. There was no appeal, no hope of reprieve. It was the law of God and the law of man, intertwined in a merciless braid. In that moment, Alaric understood a profound and terrifying truth. The disease was not his true enemy. The true enemy was the fear in the hearts of others, a fear that had been codified into law and sanctified by religion, a fear that would now systematically strip him of everything he had ever been. The day of the leper's mass dawned gray and weeping, the sky itself seeming to mourn the death of a boy who was still alive. Alaric was led to the church, not as a parishioner, but as a prisoner. The villagers, people he had known his entire life, lined the path, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and profound revulsion. They did not see Alaric, the carpenter's son. They saw a walking pestilence, a divine curse made flesh. He was forced to enter the church through the small side door, the one reserved for penitents and outcasts. Inside, a space had been cleared before the altar, and in its center a grave-like hole had been dug, a black, gaping mouth in the stone floor. A black cloth was laid beside it. This was to be his stage. Father Michael, now clad in his full liturgical vestments, began the ceremony. Alaric was made to kneel beside the hole, and the heavy, suffocating cloth was draped over him. The Mass for the dead began, the Latin chants echoing in the stone chamber, each word a hammer blow against the fragile shell of his composure. He heard his mother's stifled sobs, a sound of pure agony that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The priest then took a shovelful of earth from the symbolic grave and sprinkled it over Alaric's shrouded head, the gritty soil, a tangible symbol of his burial. Sis mortuus mundo, vivens iterum Deo, the priest intoned. Be dead to the world, but alive again to God. It was a grotesque perversion of faith, a spiritual comfort offered as a justification for an act of profound cruelty. After the Mass, the cloth was removed, and Alaric was made to stand as the priest read the litany of prohibitions, the brutal architecture of his new existence. He was forbidden to enter a church, a monastery, a mill, or a bakehouse. He was forbidden to wash his hands or his clothes in any common stream. He was forbidden to walk on a narrow path, to touch any person, especially children. He was forbidden to eat or drink with anyone but another leper. He was to wear his gray robe at all times. He was to use his clapper to warn of his approach. He was, in effect, being erased from the human community. His name was no longer his own. His property was now his family's. He was a non-person, a ghost bound by a terrifying set of rules. The ceremony was a masterpiece of systematic dehumanization, a way for the community to cleanse itself of its fear by ritually sacrificing one of its own. It was not an act of God, it was an act of man, a testament to the perverted ingenuity of a society in the grip of a collective terror. The heavy oak gate of his village, a structure his own father had helped repair just a year prior, slammed shut behind him, the sound a physical blow. The world he had known was now a sealed fortress, and he was its sole exile. His journey began. He was a ship cast from its moorings, his destination, the dreaded leper colony, the Laser House, a name whispered with fear and disgust. The road was a gauntlet of human cruelty. People who saw him coming, his gray robe and the telltale clapper in his hand marking him from a distance, would literally flee, mothers grabbing their children and pulling them indoors, farmers turning their backs in the fields, their faces contorted in masks of terror. The world shrank, the path ahead of him a sterile corridor from which all life receded. Twice he was stoned by gangs of youths from villages he passed, the sharp rocks tearing at his robe and flesh, the pain a distant, secondary sensation to the searing agony of their hatred. He learned to travel at night, a creature of the shadows, sleeping in ditches and abandoned sheds, gnawing on the hard bread and cheese his mother had secretly pressed into his hands in a final, desperate act of love. After 5 days of this purgatorial journey, he saw it, the Laser House of St. Giles. It was not a house of healing but a pen for the dying. A collection of low, squalid huts huddled behind a crumbling stone wall, set far apart from any town or road. A pall of smoke from a constantly burning fire hung over the place, a foul-smelling incense of refuse and disease. The gate was open, a gesture that was not welcoming but one of utter indifference. As he stepped inside, the full, multi-sensory horror of the place washed over him. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, infected wounds, and human waste, a miasma of decay that caught in the back of his throat. And the sights. Men and women in various stages of grotesque ruin sat in the dirt, their faces the leonine masks of advanced leprosy, their hands and feet gnarled into useless claws or wrapped in filthy rags. Some were missing noses, their faces collapsing into a central, terrifying cavity. Others were blind, their eyes milky white orbs staring into nothingness. They were the helpless victims, an entire community of them, their individual histories and identities ground down into the single, defining fact of their disease. A man with no fingers and a voice like rustling leaves greeted him, not with kindness, but with the weary resignation of one who has seen too many new arrivals. He was shown to a space on the floor of a crowded hut, a patch of dirty straw that would be his new home. There was no comfort here, no solace, only the shared reality of a slow, public decomposition. This was not a sanctuary. It was a warehouse for the unclean, a place where people were sent to fall apart, forgotten by the world that had condemned them. The days bled into one another, a monotonous, gray river of suffering. Time itself seemed to decay in the Lazar house, losing its shape and meaning. The rising and setting of the sun were the only markers in an endless cycle of pain and degradation. Alaric's body became a canvas for the disease's grotesque artistry. The nodules on his face multiplied, thickening his features, pulling his eyebrows into a permanent, leonine scowl. His voice grew hoarse and raspy as the affliction invaded his larynx. The most terrifying aspect was the slow, silent disappearance of himself. His fingers and toes, through a process of painless absorption, began to shorten, the bones and cartilage dissolving as if consumed from within. He would wake to find a finger bent at an impossible angle, another piece of himself gone. Because the nerve endings were dead, he felt no pain from cuts or burns. He once rested his hand too close to the communal fire, only realizing it was burning when he smelled his own cooking flesh. The wound, unfelt and untended, festered, becoming a running sore that refused to heal. This was the leper's paradox, a body that could not feel its own destruction. He was becoming a stranger to himself, a walking ruin piloted by a terrified ghost. The clapper, which he was forced to carry whenever he left the compound to beg, became a part of him, an artificial limb that broadcast his damnation. The rhythmic clack-clack was the soundtrack to his misery, a sound that announced his monstrosity and sent the healthy scurrying like frightened mice. The act of begging was a ritual of profound humiliation. He would stand at a crossroads, his face partially veiled, his voice a guttural croak, pleading for alms. Some would toss a coin from a safe distance, their faces a mask of disgust. Others would spit or scream curses, seeing him not as a man in need but as a physical embodiment of sin. The systematic cruelty of the outside world was a constant, grinding pressure. Society, in its terror, had become the dysfunctional tyrant, its rules and its people, the instruments of a slow, psychological torture. He saw this tyranny reflected in the eyes of his fellow sufferers. He saw men who had once been proud knights, women who had been cherished wives, now reduced to this common denominator of decay. They fought, they stole, they despaired. Yet, in rare moments, there were flickers of a shared humanity, a woman sharing a piece of bread, a man helping to bandage a wound he could not see. These small acts of kindness were like tiny, flickering candles in an immense and suffocating darkness, a fragile defiance against the overwhelming reality of their shared fate. 10 years. A decade had passed since the gate of his village had slammed shut. 10 years of slow decay, of watching his own face melt into an unrecognizable mask in the reflection of a puddle. Alaric was now 27, but he looked 100. His hair was white, his hands were gnarled claws, and his face was the full, terrifying leonine visage of the advanced leper. The boy who loved the smell of sawdust was a distant ghost, a story he could barely tell himself. But memory is a stubborn, treacherous thing. The ache for his past life, for the world that had ejected him, had not dissolved with his flesh. It festered within him, a different kind of sickness. The festival of St. John's Eve was approaching, the one night of the year when his old village would be alive with fire and music. A mad, desperate idea took root in the barren soil of his soul. To see it one last time, to be a ghost at the feast. He traveled for 3 days, a slow, painful journey, keeping to the woods and fields, a shambling creature of the night. On the eve of the festival, he found a place on a wooded hill overlooking his village. The bonfire was lit as dusk fell, a great roaring heart of flame in the center of the green. He could hear the faint, joyful strains of a pipe and tabor. He saw the villagers dancing, their forms silhouetted against the fire, their laughter carrying on the wind. It was a scene from another life, a life that had been his. And then he saw her, Ilara. She was a woman now, no longer a girl. Her dark honey hair was pinned up, and she moved with the grace he remembered. She was holding the hands of 2 small children, her children, A man stood beside her, his arm around her waist. Her husband. A sound escaped Alaric's throat, a strangled, guttural noise that was not a word, not a sob, but something utterly inhuman. It was the sound of a soul breaking. A couple, seeking privacy at the edge of the woods, heard the noise. The man turned, peering into the darkness. He saw Alaric's shape, the grotesque outline of his face lit by the distant fire. The man's face went from curiosity to disbelief, then to pure, primal terror. He screamed, "Leper! A leper in the woods!" The music stopped. The dancing ceased. A wave of panic spread through the crowd. Torches were lit. Men grabbed pitchforks and stones. The joyous festival transformed in an instant into a vengeful mob. They surged towards the woods, their voices a baying chorus of hatred. "Unclean monster! Kill it!" Stones began to rain down around him. He turned and fled, stumbling through the undergrowth, the shouts and curses pursuing him like a pack of hounds. He did not feel the branches that tore at his face or the rocks that bruised his body. The only pain was the searing, absolute finality of that moment. He was not just an outcast, he was a monster. He had not just lost his life, he had become a threat to life itself. The last ember of hope, the foolish, desperate wish to reconnect with his past, was brutally, violently extinguished. The flight from his village broke something deep within Alaric. The creature that staggered back to the laser house of St. Giles was a hollowed-out thing, a shell animated by little more than reflex. The fire of memory, which had both tormented and sustained him, had been doused, leaving behind only the cold, gray ash of despair. He retreated into a profound silence, a self-imposed exile within the greater exile of the colony. He no longer spoke to the other lepers, no longer participated in the squabbles or the rare moments of camaraderie. He was a stone at the bottom of a dark pool. His days were spent sitting against the crumbling outer wall, his face turned towards the sun he could barely feel, his mind a blank, gray landscape. The world continued its relentless assault on his body, but now he barely noticed. His eyesight, which had been clouding for years, finally failed. The vibrant world of color was replaced by a milky, impenetrable fog. His universe shrank to a small circle of sensation, the texture of the rough stone at his back, the taste of the thin, watery gruel that was his daily sustenance, the sounds of the colonized coughing, the weeping, the rasping breath of the dying. The clapper lay unused by his side. He no longer had the will or the need to venture out to beg. He was entirely dependent on the charity of the other outcasts, who, in a final, ironic twist of human empathy, would sometimes leave a piece of bread or a cup of water beside him. He was a monument to decay, a living statue of suffering, and even in this place of horrors he elicited a kind of awe. He had traveled to the furthest shore of despair and had simply stopped. The long twilight of his existence began, a slow, patient, waiting for an end that was in no hurry to arrive. He would sit for hours, his ruined face a mask of utter stillness, while the life of the laser house swirled around him. He was a constant, silent reminder of their collective fate. He was the future. He became a sort of oracle in reverse. He did not speak of what was to come, but his very presence was a prophecy of the dissolution that awaited them all. His mind, untethered from the world of sight and meaningful interaction, began to drift. He lived in a landscape of half-formed memories and sensory ghosts, the phantom scent of sawdust, the imagined warmth of his mother's hand, the echo of a girl's laughter. These were not comforting nostalgia. They were shards of a broken mirror, each one reflecting a piece of the life that had been stolen from him, each one a fresh torment. He was trapped in the prison of his own mind, a prison built from the ruins of his former life, its walls, the unfeeling darkness, its bars, the relentless progression of his own decay. The end did not come with a dramatic finality, no great struggle or moment of revelation. It arrived as quietly and as insidiously as the disease itself had 2 decades earlier. Alaric's body, a fortress that had been under siege for 20 years, finally began to surrender its last defenses. A fever took hold, a fire in his blood that his ravaged system could not fight. For 3 days he lay on his straw pallet, his breath coming in shallow, rattling gasps. The other lepers, accustomed to the constant presence of death, largely ignored him. stepping over his inert form as they went about their miserable routines. Only one, an old woman who had lost her nose and most of her fingers, would occasionally bring him a rag soaked in water to wet his cracked lips, a final, small act of human decency in a world that had forgotten the meaning of the word. In his fevered state, Alaric's mind became a whirlwind of disjointed images. He was a boy again, running through a sun-drenched field, the scent of wildflowers in the air. He was in his father's workshop, the clean scent of pine filling his nostrils. He was at the festival, the bonfire roaring, Ilara's hand warm in his. These were not memories but hallucinations, the final, desperate projections of a dying brain. The pain and the suffering, the gray robe and the clapper, the stones and the curses, all of it began to fade, replaced by the ghosts of a life he had barely lived. His last sensation was not of the filth of the lazar house or the ruin of his own body. It was the phantom feeling of cool water on his skin, a memory of washing at the basin on that long-ago afternoon before the first pale spot had appeared, a moment of clean, simple, unthinking wholeness. A single, shallow breath escaped his lips, a sigh so faint it was barely audible above the moaning of the wind through the cracks in the hut, and then silence. Alaric, the carpenter's son, was gone. His body lay on the straw, a grotesque, ruined effigy of a man. The next morning, two of the stronger lepers carried his corpse, light as a bundle of dried sticks, to the common burial pit behind the compound and tossed it in without ceremony, covering it with a thin layer of lye and dirt. It was just another piece of human refuse to be disposed of, another tally mark in the long, grim accounting of the lazar house of St. Giles. Alaric's story, in its horrific detail, was not an anomaly. It was a single, harrowing voice in a vast, silent chorus of suffering that echoed across medieval Europe for centuries. His fate was the fate of countless thousands, men, women, and children, who were diagnosed with what was then called leprosy. The term itself was a blunt instrument, a catch-all for a host of disfiguring skin conditions, from true Hansen's disease, which was only mildly contagious, to psoriasis, scrofula, and severe eczema. The diagnosis was often flawed, based more on superstition and fear than on medical reality, but the sentence was always the same: social and civil death. The system that condemned Alaric was a testament to the terrifying power of fear when it metastasizes into social policy. The lepers' mass, the robes, the clappers, these were not merely cruel customs. They were the instruments of a sophisticated and systematic process of dehumanization. By declaring the leper legally dead and ritually unclean, society could perform a kind of psychological self-preservation. It could take its deepest fears of contagion, of physical decay, of divine punishment, of mortality itself, and project them onto a single, visible group. The leper became a scapegoat, a living symbol of all that society dreaded. By casting them out, the community could believe it was casting out the evil itself, purifying itself through the sacrifice of its most vulnerable members. The dysfunctional tyrant in this narrative was not a single king or pope, but the collective consciousness of a world gripped by a terror it could not comprehend. The true contagion was not the bacterium Mycobacterium leprae, but fear itself. It was a disease of the mind that proved far more destructive than the disease of the body, creating a reality for its victims that was, in many ways, more horrific than the physical symptoms. We look back on this period with a sense of detached horror, secure in our modern medical knowledge. But the story of the medieval leper is a chilling and timeless reminder of a dark human capability, the power to define a group of people as other, as unclean, and to justify any cruelty in the name of purity and safety. The leper's clapper may be gone, but its echo can still be heard in the rhetoric of exclusion and the politics of fear that persist to this day. Alaric's life was not just a personal tragedy, it was a testament to the immense and enduring human cost of our own deepest anxieties.